The Indianapolis Colts have their new head coach, but which players on the Colts are going to benefit most from this move? We're going to talk about that all here on Locked On Colts. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us part of your daily listen. I just read the wrong thing there, guys, so we're off to a great start. But thank you guys for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. I'm Zach Hicks. Obviously, you could tell by the crazy rambling and too much energy that I am Zach Hicks and not Jake Arthur today. And Jake is also not going to be here. I wanted to come forward and say I apologize to you guys that me and Jake have not been together once this week. He started a new job to where he's working till like 8 o'clock at night, and I've been on 4 a.m. shifts all week. So it's just been a horrible time for us to try to get together to record. But for my episodes this week, I wanted to make sure that I was introducing our new people at horseshoehuddle.com. So I had Shad McGinnis on the other night, and now I got Destin Adams, our other new member at horseshoehuddle.com, someone I'm happy to finally say is a colleague of mine. Destin, what's up, man? Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it's good to be back on Locked On. I feel like I have only ever now been on with one of you. I've been on with you once before. I've been on with Jake once before. One of these days, I'm going to be on with the both of you, I swear. But super pumped to be at Horseshoe Huddle. Super pumped to be here today. But a lot of Colts news. So everything's been picking up ever since me and Shad signed with Horseshoe Huddle. I mean, all the news is just picking up. So I mean, whoever you want to give that to.
Definitely Shad. Definitely Shad.
Probably Shad.
Guys, we have a fun show for you planned today. First up, we're going to talk about some of the breaking news and just kind of, we have to get through some of the business stuff here in the first segment. But after that, we're going to talk about 3 players that are going to benefit from Shane Steichen coming in, plus, most likely keeping this defensive staff in place. We're going to talk about 3 players who are going to benefit from those 2 things. And then in our last segment today, we're going to talk about 3 players who, this kind of hurts. This kind of hurts bringing in Shane Steichen, or it hurts keeping Gus Bradley around if they do end up keeping him. So we're going to get to all that. But first, let's talk about some news and notes. I know the biggest thing today that everybody was talking about is the Indianapolis Colts have requested to interview Jim Bob Cooter, passing game coordinator for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Bob Cooter is a guy who has been around the league quite a bit for a 38-year-old. I think he got his start back with the Colts in like 2010. Big time Jim Caldwell guy. He's been with Jim Caldwell for most of his career. I know you guys are kind of hot and cold when it comes to Jim Caldwell, but very good offensive mind, very good coach. He actually was an offensive coordinator under Caldwell there with the Lions for a couple seasons. Was not the greatest, not the greatest tenure, but again, we're talking about a guy who was 32, 33 years old. He was still fairly young. He's grown from there. And in the last 2 seasons, he's worked with Shane Steichen with Philadelphia as a consultant in 2021. And then he was worked with Doug Peterson here in Jacksonville this past season. So Jim Bob Cooter, kind of a younger offensive coordinator type guy. Obviously, he would be calling plays. But what do you think, Destin, of Jim Bob Cooter?
Elite name. I mean, I feel like that has to be said first and foremost. The name value gives it some weight. Outside of that, I mean, I think he is a young mind. I think he's an up and coming mind. I know there's people near the Jacksonville area that have said that Doug Peterson obviously has helped Trevor Lawrence a ton, but they give Jim Bob Cooter a lot of praise there, saying that he has had a lot to do with Lawrence's second year rebound in a sense after the first year, whatever we want to call what Jacksonville was last year with the coaching staff there. So it's an interesting name. I expect more names to kind of come in that are going to get the interviews for that spot. Like you said, they're not going to be play calling, so that affects it a little bit. Personally, I still would like someone that I'm going to trust if Shane feels the need to pass on play calling duties, just because you never know with a first-time head coach if they believe they can actually balance it once we actually get into the season.
Yeah, for sure. Another reason to like Jim Bob Cooter is a lot of his career he spent working with the passing game, working with passing aspects of offenses. Even when he was offensive coordinator with the Detroit Lions, they were very, very, very pass heavy, like extremely pass heavy. So he's a guy, if you're bringing in like a specialist to be one of those coordinators, that's a guy who's a specialist. He's a specialist when it comes to pass game stuff. We'll see if the Jacksonville Jaguars will let the Colts interview him. I believe because he's a coordinator, technically that's viewed on the same playing field, same level as offensive coordinator because he's a pass game coordinator. So we'll see if the Jaguars let that go. They haven't blocked any of his interview requests yet this offseason, so we'll see. Another thing here, and this one's more speculation, Nate Atkins of the Indy Star said that Roy Istvan, assistant offensive line coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, is the most likely candidate for the Colts offensive line coach. We also had some speculation from my guy, Honest NFL, on Twitter. If you guys don't know Honest NFL, I'm not going to reveal who he is, obviously, but he used to work in the Eagles front office, like scouting department. So he does have some connections with Philly. He did kind of hint at it on Twitter that Roy Istvan is likely to come to Indy as offensive line coach. You guys have heard me mention this name a couple times now in the past week. Roy Istvan is a guy who I really wanted the Colts to get to kind of emulate Jeff Stoutland the best they can. Destin, what do you think? Roy Istvan, I think this is a home run hire personally.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's to get anything near Stoutland is the goal. I think that's the goal for all 32 NFL teams. It just so happens that only one team gets to have Stoutland themselves, so they don't have to replicate it. What I am more curious about was like what your squeal was like when Nate put that out there, that it was that, and that Honest NFL put it out there that it's actually likely and it's not just a dream of yours.
Destin, I feel like people have kind of realized this. Some of the things I say are not pure speculation by me. So I try, I don't want to ever be a newsbreaker. I really don't like to be. I sometimes put stuff out there that I've heard from my like 3 sources, but some of the things I say out there when I'm speculating aren't really speculation. So nothing that I heard when I heard Nate mention that and I heard Honest say that, I was like, yeah, I figured.
So the squeal actually came much earlier for you.
Yeah.
Is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, let's just say there's a reason why, like, obviously just putting puzzle pieces together, I would have said I wanted Roy Istvan, but there's a reason why I've been so for it from the beginning. But yeah,
wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Okay.
right. But no, Roy Istvan, if they are able to just seal the deal with that, I think that's going to be a phenomenal hire. Some other news and notes: Brian Decker, the Colts, I think team president of like player personnel or something like that. He's had a few different titles here with the Colts. He is leaving Indianapolis to go take a position with the Carolina Panthers. I'm not going to get too into it, but I don't think this is too big of a loss for the Colts. Not going to lie. I mean, when you're talking about a player personnel guy, a guy who his whole shtick is that he's interviewing these guys about and getting kind of like that football character. And then we heard all the things we heard last season about guys needing to have like being held more accountable and they can't, hold themselves up to that their end of the bargain without a coach yelling at them. Maybe Brian Decker wasn't doing a great job. That's the most I'm going to say about this, but I don't think this is too huge of a loss. And the Colts also made a roster move today. They claimed wide receiver, I think it was Christian Wilkerson, I think is how you say his name. Wilkerson from the New England Patriots. He didn't play at all this past season, but played in week 17 2 years ago where he had 2 touchdowns in his debut game. Very, very athletic player. I think he ran like a 6.69 or something on the 3-cone drill, which is phenomenal for a receiver. But Destin, before we move on to this next segment, what do you think about those 2 things? Any thoughts?
The Decker front, it's been an interesting one. All the Colts fans who use the Decker memes are devastated. Decker has been a fan favorite to blame when anything bad happens. My thoughts go out to all those who lost their meme worthy. They're having to clear out that part of their gallery today. The thing with Decker that interests me a little bit is that this move comes after it was announced that he sat in on most of these second round of interviews. He was one of the selected to get to sit through all of that. So I'm curious if it was known that he was leaving before that and he just got to like go. They were like, can you just do this one last thing for us? Can you make sure these guys are good elite character one more time for us, Mr. Brian Decker. But I mean, he got to sit through it, and now he's going to Carolina with his old buddy Frank Reich, I guess. We're going to get to see that go down there. A lot of Colts connections out there in Carolina, it's looking like now. And then, I mean, the waiver claim, I mean, it's adding at least somewhat of high upside to the receiver room. So I guess I have no ifs, like it's no bad things about it. Any player acquisitions you're getting this time of year aren't going to be major, believe it or not. So it'll be interesting to see how it looks come training camp. But it'll be fun for the next few months where everyone can just talk about how in the last game he had 2 touchdowns. So we'll see what comes next.
Definitely a preseason darling for sure. He's going to be one for us here in Indianapolis. But coming up, guys, we're going to talk about 3 players that I have picked. This is not Destin's pick, so you guys can yell at me if you don't like them. But 3 players.
Please yell at Zach if you don't like them.
Yes. 3 players that I think are going to thrive under the Shane Steichen era here. And also, Gus Bradley coming back, 3 players that I think kind of fit those 2 things really well. But first, the midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Destin, I've curated this wonderful list here, just wonderful list of players.
I'm excited. I'm excited to rip it apart.
Yes, but we're going to start on offense here. 2 guys who have not broken out yet, but I think with this change to Shane Steichen, we're going to see just a lot more production. And also kind of goes in line with the second-year breakout. So Alec Pierce, obviously, is one guy that I pegged as being a major breakout. And I actually wrote up an article that's going to go up tomorrow on horseshoehuddle.com about this. But Alec Pierce, I was looking at some of Shane Steichen's past with downfield threats, throwing the ball down the field, getting vertical. And his 3 years as a play caller, as an offensive coordinator play caller, Shane Steichen's quarterback, his #1 quarterback, has been top 10 in pass attempts of 20-plus air yards. Justin Herbert, I think in 2020, had 67 attempts. Jalen Hurts last year had 75. And then this past season, despite missing 2 games, Jalen Hurts had 71 attempts of over 20 yards. The Colts last year, with all their quarterbacks, had 38 attempts past 20 yards last year. Alec Pierce had 15 of those. And on those 15, he had 7 catches for 243 yards and a touchdown, 4 contested catches in there as well, out on 8 opportunities. So Alec Pierce was a really, really good downfield threat for the Colts. Shane Steichen likes to throw the ball down the field, especially if he has some kind of rushing element, because when he gets that single coverage on the outside, he's not afraid to call 4 verts. He's not afraid to call, hey, Alec Pierce, you're in press coverage. We're just going to throw a jump ball to you here on 2nd down. On 2nd and 4, we're going to throw it up to you. On 1st and 10, we're going to throw it up to you. And if you make a play or draw a pass interference, this is perfect for us. A.J. Brown last year was 4th in the NFL in targets 20-plus yards down the field with 35. So I think just looking at all this, even just like if Alec Pierce becomes nothing else but a downfield threat, I think his production is going to go up so much next season because this offense is going to throw the ball down the field a lot more.
Yeah, I'm for anything that gets Alec Pierce the ball more.
Yes.
I mean, so whatever that takes. I mean, I was at the point at the end of last year that Nick Foles was completely awful, but Nick Foles kept throwing downfield, so I didn't care. I was like, keep him in the game. Like he can throw 12 interceptions in a game. If he keeps throwing downfield, I don't care. So anything that gets Alec Pierce the ball like that is a good one. I think the receiving room, you could make the argument that the receivers in general is a big upgrade for him, just because, I mean, now it says a lot when he got to work with the Chargers with multiple receivers and Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, goes to Philadelphia, gets to have A.J. Brown this season with Devontae Smith. But even last year, you just see that the ball gets spread around. in these offenses that he has had a hand in, which is nice to see. So we don't have to go back to 2 years ago when Michael Pittman has over 1,000 yards and the second leading receiver had under 300.
Yes. And another thing to throw in with Michael Pittman Jr. with this as well. Michael Pittman Jr. last season on 20 plus air yard targets, 1 catch on 7 attempts. That's all he had past 20 yards last year. Alec Pierce doubled up the second leader in targets 20 yards down the field. So yeah, the Colts offense is going to be a little more explosive this season. I think that's a safe bet. The next player I have here is tight end Jelani Woods, which I know you guys are pretty high on. I'm extremely high on as well. I think watching his rookie film, you could see why this is going to be a really good tight end one day if they figure out how to use him. And he's actually kind of the opposite of my reasoning for Alec Pierce. My reasoning for Jelani Woods is Jelani Woods was only used as a downfield target last season. He averaged 10.7 yards downfield. That was his average depth of target last year, which I think was 6th among all tight ends in the NFL. So he was only targeted down the field, and he never really got anything underneath or never anything run after catch. Now, if you look at Dallas Goedert last year with the Eagles, I think he's like the 6th lowest yards per catch, or average depth of target with the Eagles last year. It was like 4 yards down the field or something like that, or 5 yards down the field. That's all they did, but they got him opportunity to run after the catch. He was top 5 in yards after catch for tight ends. He was top 5 in yards after catch per reception among tight ends, along with getting a ton of work in the underneath passing game. And Dallas Goedert's a great player. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Jelani Woods is better than him, but 6'7", 253 pounds, runs a 4.6, and you're going to get me some more tight end screens. You're going to get me more mesh concepts underneath. You're going to get me just kind of underneath things where he can run after the catch. I'm excited, man. I really think, even though this is a changing of a role here for him, just get him more targets underneath and let him go to work, because he is so massive and so fast for a tight end that if he's getting 20 to 30 targets under 5 yards, that's line of scrimmage, like in screens and quick hitters, he's going to at least fall forward for like 8 more yards because he's that big. So I really think Jelani Woods in that Dallas Goedert role and kind of bring that ADOT down and kind of target him underneath and let him run after the catch could bode really well for the Colts next season.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to teach Jelani Woods how to make big plays down deep using his size. I mean, he's got that under control. When you're 6'7" with that frame and that catch radius, I mean, that's going to come natural to him. So being able to develop ways to get him the ball in space, because I guess the thing that people – I mean, if you were a big combine person last year, you're going to remember that Jelani Woods blew that thing up. But when you just look at Jelani Woods, you don't think he's going to kill you with his legs. But if you give him the ball in open space, we saw even in glimpses last year that Jelani Woods can move once the ball's in his hands. So he can be a weapon. You just got to get him the ball and let that one of the best nicknames I've ever heard for him, and just let that angry moose just run through the field, man. Because Jelani Woods, anything that, like I said it for Alec Pierce, anything that means more Jelani Woods action is a good thing for the Colts.
Yeah, and another thing with Jelani Woods, he played quarterback in high school, like that option rushing quarterback. So he knows what to do when the ball's in his hands.
Now, imagine Jelani Woods at quarterback for the QB sneak formation that the Eagles run. Like, let's just keep trying to figure out ways to make that formation more elite, okay?
Oh, yeah. Let's do it for sure. My last one here, I wanted to go on defense, but my article tomorrow, or today, I guess, when you guys are listening to this, it will be another offensive player. But to go to the defense side of the ball, this is a guy who already just broke out under Gus Bradley, and just having another year with Gus Bradley, I think is going to do wonders for his career. And that's Zaire Franklin. I mean, we can't say enough about Zaire Franklin on this podcast, or just in this state here in Indiana. Like, we just all love Zaire Franklin after what he did last year. But I can only imagine where he can go with his game with more experience in this scheme. Like, he played some outstanding football last year, and I just think the sky's the limit for him as a person, as a player. And he's one of the players I think the Colts need to build around going forward. So yeah, Zaire Franklin, the longer he's in this Gus Bradley scheme and lets him do what he did last year, I think he's just going to keep getting better and better. Yeah,
I mean, and the thing about Zaire with Brian Decker leaving, Zaire is not one of the guys that needs to be yelled at. So we don't have to worry about that acquisition hurting him at all. I mean, Zaire has enough self-motivation to go the rest of his career. But yeah, hard to dislike Zaire Franklin, unless you're Jamal Williams from HBO from the Hard Knocks last year. Maybe there you found a reason not to like him. But it'll be interesting for this next year, because with the likely exiting of Bobby Okereke, whether that ends up being just leaves in free agency, whether the Colts find someone to be able to tag and trade Bobby in some way. It's going to be a very similar situation where Zaire is going to have the same amount of snaps, even with a healthy Shaquille Leonard out there.
Yeah. And we kind of saw it last year too. Even when Shaquille Leonard was getting back out there, he was cutting into Bobby Okereke snaps, not into Zaire Franklin snaps. So yeah.
And let's not even count Shaquille Leonard as playing last year.
No.
That's a myth that people have made up that he played snaps, I think. Not a real stat.
Yeah. Do you think I missed anybody here? Do you want to throw out any other guys you think are going to thrive in this Shane Steichen era?
I'm just gonna say, Jonathan Taylor has strived. Obviously, he had the breakout a couple seasons ago. I think the element that's going to be added is just how creative that the Eagles' run offense has looked. So, giving Jonathan Taylor not where he doesn't have to just do it himself. The thing that was crazy about 2 years ago is that Jonathan Taylor would go out there and just create opportunities. He would get hit in the backfield and just make people miss to the point where big plays would happen. Give him a guy who is very intentional on how they develop the run game and very intentional on getting the formations on the offensive line to open up space. Jonathan Taylor could go crazy this next year, guys, and that's exciting to think about.
Definitely. Well, guys, that was your daily dose of optimism here on Locked On Colts. Next up, we're going to talk about some negative points of view. Talk about some guys who maybe don't benefit from Shane Steichen coming in and maybe don't benefit from Gus Bradley coming back. We're going to talk about that here in a second. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. You've heard me talk about this mobile game app, and I can't tell you how much fun I had competing against my fellow Locked On NFL host. Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers was our Locked On NFL host champion this past season. If you came in first, third place, tell the audience. Oh, that's for me. Sorry. Anyway, Chris Carter is the one who won. I did not. Obviously, I did not. That little note right there is not for me. Well, now it's your turn to compete. Ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. You'll manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through seasons, and lead your team to glory while trying to build a dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, and navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft. We've created a Locked On League for you to compete against Locked On fans from all over the world. Can you be the ultimate Locked On Football GM? Choose the Locked On League in the app to join. Can you create a football dynasty? Locked On Colts listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. It's Locked On in all caps, so make sure to check it out today. To download the game, visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, Destin. Well, I'm going to start with a very obvious one, a guy who I don't think is going to be here next season, and a guy who certainly would not benefit from Gus Bradley coming back, and that's going to be cornerback Kenny Moore II. I think he's a guy who certainly needs a change of scenery if Gus Bradley is returning as defensive coordinator, which all odds are Gus Bradley is coming back. He's just a guy who didn't mesh well whatsoever in this new scheme. You know, we didn't see the playmaking. We did see a little bit of the run defense still. He was still a really good run defending corner this past season. But he struggled when he was left on an island. He struggled in man coverage again this season. And he just didn't make those game-changing plays that we're accustomed to. So, you know, it makes most sense for him to probably go to Chicago and get back with Matt Eberflus, a scheme that he was thriving in. But I don't think Kenny Moore, if he is back, is going to be too happy about being back under Gus Bradley. I just don't think those two mesh super well in terms of playing ability and scheme.
So more likely to be in a Chicago Bear uniform next year, Kenny Moore or Bobby Okereke?
I'm going to say Kenny Moore. I think Kenny, especially if the Colts are trading up to 1, Kenny Moore's going to be tossed into that deal for sure. I think
because why not?
Right, because why not? Because they would do that in a separate trade probably anyway. So I'm going to say Kenny Moore because I think Bobby Okereke is going to get some interest around the league. Where Kenny Moore, it's probably mostly going to be the Bears that want him. But yeah, I just don't see Kenny Moore coming back. But if he does, this is not a great move for him coming back to the Colts.
I mean, he was pretty candid. He's always kind of been a pretty candid guy,
right,
when the camera's in his face. There are some players that's not the case for, but Kenny's usually been a guy who tells it as he sees it, tells it as it is. And I guess you can call it a little prompting by the question, but with very little prompting, he pretty much gave out that this could have been the last time he put on that horseshoe helmet, that horseshoe jersey. So like it's already out there, and like you said, I mean, I just think the scheme fit is not there for him. I think in that nickel corner spot, he just needs to be able to do more to put out his skill set than just be a 90% coverage guy all the time in that order. Where if he goes back to play for Eberflus in Chicago, we saw how dynamic he was used and how many different ways he got to be used there. And I think Chicago would welcome it, and I think he wouldn't have to go very far. And he could join his ex teammate Al-Qadim Muhammad, who was last year's guarantee lock to go to Chicago. So
Yes. Well, this year's guaranteed lock was Parks Frazier following Frank Reich to Carolina. That was the most obvious guaranteed lock. But next is Kenny Moore going to Chicago at some point this offseason. The next guy I have on this list, I didn't really go too hot takey with this list here about guys to worry about or guys to be negative about, because it's optimism time, guys. It's optimism time. Not going to get too crazy, but I went with right guard Will Fries. And this is a guy who I love. I love Will Fries. I think he did some really good things last year, and I think he's going to be a quality reserve offensive lineman going forward. But with this scheme requires offensive linemen to be so athletic and to get so much displacement with their strength. You need to be a guy who either has pure dominant strength to move players, or a guy who's a freak athlete who can get out in space and do some things that way. Will Fries is kind of just solid at both. He's a good athlete, not great. He's fine at being a people mover, but he's not like a bulldozer type at right guard. I just think the Colts need to get more of an imposing presence there, whether that's with the 35th pick in the draft, with their 3rd round pick from Washington, or through free agency. I do think they just need to get more of someone who has an elite specialty. And I think Will Fries is very, very solid. I think he's a very fine player, good technique and pass protection, and just a guy to have on your roster. But I just think with this scheme and how important the offensive line is, they need to make some kind of move here. And I just think this hire of Shane Steichen kind of moves them away from Will Fries being the starter at right guard next season.
Yeah, I mean, I like Will Fries too. I've been pretty open about that. I think you kind of hit it right. Like, he's just very solid. I think the one thing that kind of could go for him is just how much the Eagles like to use that 6th lineman, that like in these different schemes like that. So the possibility that if he separates himself as that best reserve, he could see snaps still. Obviously, Andre Dillard in Philadelphia was a tackle, so it was easier to do that swing tackle type method and be able to use him in that light. But if Will Fries can show himself to be the best reserve, I feel like he could get in those 6 lineman sets. Another person that I would mention that is probably going to be in the negative light here, Michael Strong. Just or anyone in that light, any player who has not found his footing yet with this team and has upside and all these other things that you would argue with a new coaching staff coming in on the offensive side, there's less people that are going to be in the room just banging the table for that guy to make the roster. There's going to be less people just hoping and saying, well, this guy has something. We've seen it for 2 years. Shane Steichen hasn't seen it for 2 years. Shane Steichen is going to be seeing him for the first time this offseason, and there's a chance that he may not even know who that is right now. Like, if we're being honest with each other. So guys like Michael Strong, there's other people that you could probably come to mention thinking of them, but anyone in that light where you're a player who people see potential in you, you just haven't been able to do it. Desmond Patman would be another one, but obviously went on to Buffalo during that playoff run when he got signed off the practice squad.
Yeah, that's a great point. Great point to throw that in there. The last one I have here is any of the quarterbacks currently on the roster. So, Matt Ryan, who we know is going to get released, if he were to stay for whatever reason, I think it's a terrible fit in the Shane Steichen offense, no matter what offense Shane Steichen is running. I think it's just a horrible fit. I love his brain. I would love Matt Ryan to be a coach or something like that, but absolutely not as a quarterback on this roster. Nick Foles is absolutely shot in every way when it comes to being a passer. His arm is worse than Matt Ryan's right now. So definitely not Nick Foles.
And he still throws it deep.
Yeah. I love it, man. I think he had 13 attempts over 20 yards last year, and Matt Ryan only had 20 for the whole year.
Nick didn't care, man. Like people hated it. People really did. They wanted Nick Foles bench from the moment he played. But the fact that man did not look at the check down, like, I loved it. It was It at least made it fun.
Yeah. And the last guy I'll throw in here is Sam Ellinger. I don't think this really hurts him. I don't think it really helps him because I think that, Shane Steichen has more connections to other quarterbacks around the league. So if they do take an Anthony Richardson or a CJ Stroud or Bryce Young super high, he's probably going to already bring in like a Gardner Minshew or someone that he's worked with to be that backup. And I don't see Shane Steichen keeping a third quarterback for a dude he hasn't even seen develop for the last couple of years. Like, he could turn on the film and say, hey, Ellinger had a good week 17 game against Houston, but that's not enough for him to be over Gardner Minshew, who I think can win me a game in a pinch. So any of these quarterbacks currently on the roster, I think this hiring of Shane Steichen I think they're going to clear house at quarterback this offseason.
I mean, every time you heard someone praise Sam Ellinger, like the first thing they would say is he just has such a good grasp of Frank Reich's offense.
Yeah,
that pro just leaves the table for him. I mean, I will say Sam Ellinger grew on me a little bit over the time. I have a tweet still out there, and I'll leave it up there forever, that I said the worst draft, whoever drafts Sam Ellinger in that draft class would be the worst pick of the draft. Later on in that draft, obviously the Colts would make that selection. He's grown on me a little bit. I think Sam has value as a scout team quarterback. I just don't think Sam is ever going to be a guy that you can rely on, even as a backup, to come in and win you a game in a pinch. And I think that is where the backup position will go. A little fun question for you. Who is more likely to suit up at quarterback for the Colts next season, Matt Ryan or Phillip Rivers?
I mean, Phillip Rivers is more likely, but
I mean, it got to be,
it's not
right?
happening. It's not happening.
Neither of them are happening. But the fact that a retired man who was just coaching in Alabama is more likely to be quarterback than Matty Ice. Sad days.
Right. Well, guys, I think that's all we have for today. I mean, look, I want to say one more thing about Sam Ellinger. He's proven me wrong before, so I hope he keeps proving me wrong. But I think that's all we have for today, guys. Destin, thank you for joining the show and filling in for Jake. Next week, guys, me and Jake are going to be back as our normal duo all next week. But shout out to Destin, Andrew, and Shad for jumping on this week and filling in for us during our crazy work week. Make sure you guys are following all of us here on social medias at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, at Andrew Moore NFL from yesterday, at Rashad McGinnis, and at the Destin Adams.
Hey, whoever has at Destin Adams, if you want to give it to me, I'm game. But until then, has to stay.
Yeah, I'm in a feud with at Zach Hicks and at Zach Hicks 1 right now. We're in a 3-way fight that they haven't been on Twitter since 2012. So
exactly, same thing for at Destin Adams. It's the same person. They're all hoarding.
Yeah, they are, man. They are. Well, also subscribe to Locked On Colts on YouTube and also Horseshoe Huddle on YouTube as well, where you can find Destin and Shad's shows on there. I think you guys just went live last night, right? For your guys' first show?
Yep. Every Wednesday you'll see us going live now. So sadly, you guys got to see our faces now.
Oh gosh. I'll have to jump over there a little bit too, just to beautify everything. I'm sure on either side here, guys, we would love your ratings and reviews. Make sure you guys leave them on the comments. And guys, we will catch you next week.